Pardon me?
Will you text me?
Yes, I certainly will.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
The newspaper tries to do a good job of that, and I think they do to some extent, but I don't think they're real
It can be pretty
time.
quick, you know.
You should know in,
Once they drive those
In his
precinct
race, probably
votes in,
around
it's
9.
pretty quick.
Yeah, they,
school board.
they're having a party in the clubhouse in the subdivision, so.
Well, I was talking with Nikki.
Business
Yeah,
cards.
she had her deal.
Spelled your name wrong.
The seller.
It's called Duncan.
Okay. We'll call this meeting to order. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day in the city in which we live. Guide us this evening as we make our decisions. In Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, that snuck up on me. Well, this is our special call meeting of the City of Noonan for the sole purpose of discussion regarding review of policies, procedures, and practices. Mr. Phillips, how are you, sir?
Very well, Mayor Brady, members of council. As you know, we're here today following up from an update that Mr. Craver provided to council at the April the 12th meeting. Following some short discussion at that meeting, it was decided that we would hold a work session so that we could have further direction on how this body may desire to proceed. I don't really have a lot prepared for you today. I do have a few slides that I want to present to you, just kind of to frame the discussion a little bit, help you understand. Because as we were going through the process that started back with the resolution to where we procured mayor's management leadership, you may remember the terminology of the resolution. I think it referred to policy, procedures, and practices. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what those are and the roles of this particular body and the roles of management before we get into discussion. Because like I said, I just got a couple of slides. It won't really take but just a few minutes, and then we'll certainly open it up, council, for discussion. First of all, policies versus procedures. Policy, I mean, I think you know this. All of you have been serving this capacity for quite some time, but the policies are reviewed and adopted by council. You are the elected body who has been charged with setting policy. Policy comes in the form of, as you know, ordinances, which you adopt many different ordinances in the name of an ordinance. Policy, sometimes you adopt straight up policy, and I got on the next slide, I've got some examples of what some of those policies that this body touches. And sometimes you simply adopt code, whether that's a development code or a construction code, but all of those together form the policy. Then you may ask yourself, well, how does that differ from procedure? Well, procedures are actually, and we've discussed this as we've discussed the role of the city manager, council manager form of government. Procedures are established by management to implement those policies, i.e. ordinance, policy, or codes adopted by this particular body. So moving forward, policies. I have in front of you here some of the more significant, not a thorough list of the policies that are adopted by this particular council. And when I'm saying policy here, I'm not referring to ordinances. Obviously, as you know, your code of ordinance is a very thick document. So here I'm just strictly referring to the word policy. Probably when you think of policy, probably the personnel policy is the first thing that comes to mind that this particular body reviews and adopts. And you can see here, it was last amended in 2016. Probably one of the more important policies that this body adopts, and you adopt it along with the annual budget, are our financial policies. Financial policy, you know, they set direction in terms of investment expenditures, fund balance policy, debt administration, etc. And like I said, those are actually reviewed and incorporated annually into the budget document. Some of the more familiar policies this body has adopted, you may remember the multiple discussions that we've had on facility usage policy. Last amendment in 2021. And you also remember, we ended up adopting a movie filming policy that directed some authorization, or gave staff authorization to permit certain movie requests, and certain requests would come to this body. That particular policy was adopted in 2020. There are some operating procedures within the departments, like I said, that are established by ordinances. These ordinances obviously adopted by this body, and some examples of those are the operating procedures found within rezonings, annexations, permitting, building inspections, etc. Doing the same thing with procedures implemented by management. Again, this is not a complete exhaustive list, but it is a good example list. We'll start with the police SOPs, operating procedures. You can see that they were last amended 2022. As a matter of fact, I think I recall last week having an amendment come across the software which we use to update those policies. I think the majority of those policies have probably been updated in the last 6 months, would you say, Chief Blankenship? Fire operating procedures, I talked with Chief Brown. I will have to apologize, there is actually a typo on that particular slide. They were actually last amended in 2010. I think I must have copied and pasted, forgot to actually change that, but I want to be honest with you. The fire procedures in 2010, but the fire management staff, administrative staff is currently working to overhaul and update those particular standards. Then obviously we got finance operating procedures. Obviously those are exactly what they are. They tell you how to make deposits, how to cut checks, AP, accounts payable, accounts receivable, etc. They were last amended in 2021. We got municipal court operating procedures. As you recall, we just created a separate municipal court. So under the leadership of Ms. Blankenship, she created her SOPs this year. The Carnegie Library, they have SOPs for events and book checkouts, other educational offerings. Again, they were last amended in 2022. They were originally created by the former director. We got 2 departments working on operating procedures. That would be HR and leisure services. And we got several departments, I'll be honest with you, that don't have SOPs, basically because some of their work is guided by different situations. For example, the facility maintenance department, they work on work orders and requests and notifications of certain issues in the buildings. Our beautification staff, they perform maintenance based upon assignments to certain crews. If you're a mechanic, you may be doing repair work based upon manufacturer specifications. So really there's not direct SOPs as it relates how to remove a tire or a wheel or replace brake pads. But anyway, it is important to know that the procedures that we utilize to implement the policy that this body, for the most part, I'm very comfortable with where they stand in terms of them being updated. Other than the fire department, which they are certainly working, most of our policy or procedures are within a year or 2 old at the most. But anyway, I think that's a good overview of the difference between policy, procedure. But I certainly want to open it up to questions, which direction you may want to go. Concerns, thoughts, or questions?
Mr. Alexander.
Cletus, and maybe Chief Blankenship can help with this. I've been at some of the dog and pony shows, and Chief has a thick book but some of those that come out of that book, is it state related also? If you could kind of enlighten us on that. I mean, this is, I don't know if you all have seen it, but it is a thick book and it changes all the time.
The book that you're referring to is the actual law book. That's
Yes, sir.
the code book set by the state. And it does. We get updates every July. The Capitol, they vote, they change. If anything changes, we get legislative updates, so it changes. We have to update that in training, so that does change. As far as how that relates to our SOP, and we are a state certified agency, so we're required based on the state certifications that our SOP maintains and follows what all those regulations are. So we constantly stay up with that, because if they change that, we have to stay up on that with our policies. So our policies do go in line with the code book and all the state certifications that are
Yes, sir.
required for us to do.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
May I ask, so when you get those policy changes, within a reasonable time frame that you've already disseminated that to the downline, to the officers, et cetera, right?
So we
What's
use-
kind of your timeframe?
We use a program called Power DMS, and our policy stays on that program. So when that policy is updated and we put it out, it immediately goes to all officers that are there. They then have to review it, read it, go through it, and they have to sign off on it. So we have a signature from every officer upon that. And we also use our training division to go over and train when we're having classes to update and keep the training up to date with officers.
Good. Thank you.
Got a couple questions.
Sure.
In the process of developing these policies and procedures, was there any outside consultancy used?
Specifically, are you referring to?
I'm referring to any of them, the police, the fire, the leisure services, I mean, because.
Well, obviously, some of the policies that this body has touched, obviously, there's been a public opportunity, but the answer would be no. When we're developing the management-led procedures, I'm not aware of you having any citizen input.
Not necessarily citizen, but professional input. So we are a member of GPAC, which is Georgia Police Accreditation Coalition Group, which goes along with Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police, the GACP group. So we do use other agencies when we are updating or developing a policy. We will talk to those agencies around the state also as we look at, or if we need to make any adjustments with ours, but that's why those programs are there for us. And all those in GPAC are state certified agencies, or CALIA, which is nationally accredited. They're all in that group.
And what about citizen input? I mean, when it comes down to it, this whole thing started off with citizens saying, hey, we want to have some sort of say-so, some sort of way to communicate better, to get information better, don't know what the procedures are. Because part of this review, in my mind, is not necessarily with the intent of making vast changes. We could find out that it's just that people just don't know how, or don't know the information of how they want to interact, but we won't know until we look. And so that's why I wanted a set of outside eyes, and I think that that's what this ordinance was more about, or this resolution rather, was all about having the citizens see a level of transparency, a level of accountability, and understanding. And so I get it that you've changed some things, but how do we as people who are not inside the police department or inside as city workers know what those are, how they apply to us, to be able to say, hey, I've got a problem, how do I address it? And it's not just the police department, it's anything. I mean, we've had people come to us and say, hey, I had a problem with trash service. I've had a problem. It's about, as we said in the resolution, about creating or providing insight on how citizens interact and we address their concerns, their complaints, and their needs. That's the language we have in here. So how are we addressing that?
I think that's for this body to discuss.
That's what this is all about for me, is how do we handle that? And we unanimously said, well, let's do a review so that we can find out what those are. Make sure that our policies are addressing that citizen-facing. And as a matter of fact, that's what Merritt and Associates came back and said, is instead of doing a deep dive into every single policy and procedure, let's focus on that citizen interaction.
I mean, you've got a process. If somebody has a complaint against the police department or the fire department, or what, there is a process.
There's
that you go
absolutely
through. Describe that to
complaint
us.
process, but am I hearing, though, that are you looking for transparency or responsive to complaints? Because I know that we're super responsive to any type of inquiry complaint process. So is it the responsiveness, the lack of responsiveness, or is it transparency?
I think it's all three.
So do you believe we're not responsive? I have to ask that question here.
I have to say that if a citizen
And I-
is coming
specifically?
to me and saying, hey, I don't know what, I'm not getting the response I want, or they're calling me to say, I'm calling you because I'm not hearing what I need to hear, then it either is that they don't understand.
I've not heard specifically what that concern is. Specifically, I'd love to be able to address it, but generally, I don't know how to address it. I think it's a general broad statement.
So what I'm saying is that I think that if we have a review of those processes and procedures.
Which processes and
get
procedures? Can we be
the ones-
specific? It would really,
The ones about citizen interaction and how they make complaint, how they make complaint or input into the city operations. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not necessarily, because I agree with what Merrick said, which is we don't necessarily have to get down into every little detail, but this is really about the citizen interaction. Because that is what they came here asking for.
Mr. Outlander?
I can only go by experience, and when my citizens have a problem, I know they typically will call either Cletus or Mr. Haskell, or they'll call me, and I'll look into what that problem is, and I'll discuss it with Cletus or Haskell. Now, if it's something that deals with the police or the fire or maybe code enforcement, then either Cletus or Haskell, myself, I don't go up there and check on this and ask this. I give it to Cletus. So to me, that procedure that you're asking or questioning about is the citizen is calling up the city and is directed. And if they don't feel they have any resolve with that problem, they've called me. And then I'll call Cletus and he handles it.
can I ask a
That-
specific question? I think this is maybe, you're getting to more than maybe trying to respond to a complaint and maybe more than posting operating procedures for view, which we can easily post our operating procedures for view. But I think what I'm hearing is you would like to see citizen involvement when we are reviewing and developing our processes. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is what you're hearing, is that citizens have asked to be part of
If this body
that.
would like that, I could certainly do that. I know that,
I have a comment on that. I understand citizens wanting to input, but quite frankly, I'm not sure the qualification of, I'd want citizens inputting to the chief of police on how to run the police department as a citizen. There's always going to be complaints and issues that somebody's going to find if they dig around enough. But to have a citizens group of oversight input into the fire department, the police department in particular, I think you're asking for some serious issues because nobody is going to be satisfied with the input or output that they do get, because they're going to think that here's what's going to happen. They're going to have some input, and then they're going to decide, well, my input was not received, so therefore I was really not heard. So we are back full circle again. Yeah, just respond. That's just I don't see the qualification. Now, if it appears to me, I'll just continue here, that the oversight and the groups and the associations that they belong to is the type of input, quite frankly, that they need from other professionals, not from unprofessional citizens who are trying to input into the police department because they don't like certain things, or the fire department, or response times, et cetera. I think we're asking for, I don't see that beneficial at all, quite frankly.
So the citizens who are members of this community and interact with our city departments, not just the police department and fire department, but all of them, when they have a public face, shouldn't have any kind of input?
I didn't say not any kind of, they can have questions,
They-
and they can come, there's a policy and a procedure and a protocol that they can go through for any complaint or whether they want to submit some ideas. Any of that. Am I correct or incorrect in making that statement?
Well, it's operation. Let's run this trail out.
Yeah, and again, I do,
Let me ask it in a different way. Could a citizen go to our website and institute a complaint?
yes.
How?
Oh, there's many ways. You can
Okay.
see, click, fix, direct email, direct phone calls. I mean, we are super, super transparent about how to contact us, which you're not going to find that in every local government's website. So there's several ways you could institute a complaint with us. Walk into the office. We see those frequently. You know, I'm going back to, you know, when we get into policy review, you know, I can give you just a few examples when you get inside of like the personnel policy. I mean, we got policy in there on vacation time, sick time, dress code, social media policy, cell phone policy. And like I said, I think we got about 700 pages of SOPs in the police department, and a lot of them are very, very technical, how to handle an incident scene, correct? Yes, sir. I think what we're getting at is somebody would just, a few specific things. If we can know what your specific concerns are, because I don't think anyone, I just don't know that we could manage a process where there's a citizen committees reviewing all the technical aspects of how to make cash deposits, to how to
And that's
criticize or critique our vacation policies, our time off policies.
And
So,
those aren't the things that I'm talking about.
can you
I
please
think-
elaborate? That would help us.
I think that what we're talking about are when it comes to specifically citizen complaints and citizen concerns. And I don't think anybody is out there trying to get into the weeds on vacation time and how you turn your time sheet in. I think what it is the public-facing parts of what we do as a city, and having that ability for our citizens to be able to say, hey, you know what, I think this is a good idea or not, when we're trying to change things within our system. And I'm not talking about those administrative things. I'm talking about, for instance, we had a conversation this week with Chief of Police. This was my first time really sitting down with him to really hear, with my neighborhood association, some of the things that he's implementing, and they sound great, but I wouldn't know it, neither would the citizens, if we hadn't had the conversation. And I'm like, he's clearly making a lot of good changes, but I'm asking for some citizen, particularly making sure that there's some sort of input into this cultural change. And that doesn't have to come at the citizen task force. That was also addressed in the report from Merritt. She didn't think we needed to have that. But I do think that we need to have some sort of systemic way, whether it's a survey, whether it's anything that will allow our citizens to be heard on things that concern how they are dealt with from their city.
Can you,
And I think that part of this is really is taking the time to really look at it and say, hey, these are some of the complaints we've gotten in the past. Let's look at what some of the commonalities are in them and see if there is some way to improve that interaction. Right now, what I'm getting is a lot of pushback from wanting citizens to just have some sort of voice in this. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Nobody is trying to put people who are not professionals, who are not experts at this. You don't have to be an expert at it to have been affected by it. So this is, hey, let me tell you how I'm affected, and then you can go to the professionals and ask them how to better handle this. That's what I'm looking for.
are you specifically talking about complaints related to how people are treated?
It is.
So it's not about, it's about how people are treated or the perception of treatment, correct?
It is in a lot of ways, and a lot of that may very well be, because I don't know. That's why I'm asking for the policy review, to see if we're perpetuating that by policy.
So would you say, I mean, listen, you know, Chief, you know this group sitting right here in front of us. In your feeling, you personally feel that there's that going on?
I don't have to feel that, I've been told that by
Well-
people who were citizens who said, I feel this way.
But earlier, you also said that in two different ways, they didn't get the answer they wanted. And that happens a lot in life to everybody every day. And that turns into, well, I didn't get treated right because I didn't get the answer I wanted. When the answer, because we have sat here before in front of folks who have had water drainage issues and other things that have gone along, and they clearly didn't get the answer they wanted because our policies didn't allow us to provide the answer they wanted. So that's,
Just, also, there was a mention of what you really liked and what was a positive was Chief making the effort to come to your HOA and explaining that that was obviously it had an impact. And so what I hear from that is the participation in a conversation with public to let them understand what's going on and to interface with him, to get to know him as a person. It's kind of like, it's really nice. You can, well, for lack of a better way to put it, people can sit and talk about until they've really been in their shoes. When you're face to face with somebody and they're explaining as to how what's going on in their life and how they're being affected as well, that's some good, healthy interaction. And to Keith's point, right there at that podium, anybody can come at any given time and say whatever they want. And it's open mic. It's not, they're not, and they can express their ideas with that as well. I haven't heard you say anything really specific. It seems to me more generalities, and I haven't heard the same issues at all from anyone of people who I represent, quite frankly, who I serve, so.
Well, one policy I know that the chief has implemented is the officers that are out patrolling, he wants them to go and just stop and say hello to someone. Joe, whatever, and sit down and talk with them. And I think that's a big plus of meeting the people, because we haven't seen that in the past. But I agree with Councilman Guillaume that if someone has some type of issues, they can come up to the city council and speak, or they can call their council member and say, hey, I have this problem.
Just let me give an example here. I was Army, military, police, K-9 Corps, okay? But I'm not going to presume, and I'm a citizen, I'm not presume that I can go to the chief and say, look, this has been my experience. I wouldn't do that. And this is what I think you ought to be doing with your K-9 units. You follow me? I don't have that was then, and this is now. I have experience from that, but things are far more advanced, way beyond my pay grade when it comes to those things. And when you get into the personal feelings and et cetera and experiences of that, they often can be, perspective is different. You know, if there wasn't any avenue for people to speak, then I would say maybe you need an opportunity for people to speak, but there is. You can't deny that they can come here anytime and say what they want to say.
Could I ask a question? And this is kind of, and I applaud Chief Blankenship for taking the lead and getting out there, doing community policing, getting involved with the folks. I mean, that is important. Would it be helpful to have all the different departments, because there are other departments that face the public, the police, the fire department going out and doing this, the cemetery department going out and doing this, because they face the public, and unfortunately it's during a grieving time. But at some point, they maybe need to go lay some groundwork with the public so they understand how the cemetery system works and how the plots work. I mean, does it make sense to do that and for the leisure services to go out and do this? At some point, it becomes a a pantheon of a parade to try to get everybody out there. And I can appreciate that, and I know, to Councilman Alexander's point, I've been contacted directly, and I've told them, hey, have you reached out on the webpage to the city, to the manager of that department? Because there's kind of like a hierarchy, go to the department head, they're listed, email and phone. Have you talked to the assistant city manager? Have you talked to the city manager? And if not, and I've then addressed it back down to the city manager, assistant city manager. If it's about, and I think we're all trying to figure out, is it a matter of they want to have the ability to input to our actual policy, or do they just want to have that interaction to get to know the city on a better level? And to address the transparency issue, again, we do have contact information. Maybe we could do a better job, I don't know, of having the policies that we can have, that are public-facing policies, available on the website. So that they can go and they can look at the policy. The ones that are publicly facing. They don't need to know how we do payroll. I mean, I don't think that has anything to do with it, but, the community policing, hey, and if we have a schedule where we're going to the different neighborhoods. I mean, because I know folks, I think on my side of town would love to have folks come out too. We've done the donuts with the cop days. And I went to one of those and there was a good interaction of folks coming through. I mean, there was a good flow of folks. And I don't want to pick on just the police department because that's not right to them as one of our city departments. Because if this is a policy review, then I can understand having an internal policy review every year, every other year. Having a larger one like every 4 or 5 years, just to make sure it's up to date. And I appreciate that the chief here, he's obligated by state law under certain requirements and regulations by the law that he has to get that information out there in a timely manner. The fire department, I don't know. The cemetery department, I'm sure there is, but it's not as frequent. And so it becomes an issue of magnitude that if somebody has a concern, I agree with the city manager that we have the ability to report stuff. And maybe it's an education issue where we need to just be better at communicating that other than just the website, how can we communicate that, how to make a comment. And I get it, there's comments which people just want to say something. There's concerns which, hey, it doesn't affect me directly, but I want to address something that I see as might be an issue. And then there's a complaint where it's affected me directly, and I want to complain about it. And generally, when you're complaining about something, it's because you're biased in some direction because you've been directly affected and you didn't get the outcome that you specifically wanted. But based on law, policy, procedures, you may not always get the outcome you desire because that's just not how life works.
Or you may not get the outcome that was fair and equitable based on just common decency. I mean, so at this point, I'm like, this isn't some, hey, life's not fair, get over it kind of conversation, because that's what I'm getting from you. What I'm saying is that when citizens have complaints, legitimate complaints, then what is the process and procedure to review what we do to make sure that if there is some fault there or something wrong or something we could have done better? Because not all the time things that are just flat out wrong and indefensible. It may be, hey, we could have handled this a little bit better and everybody wouldn't have had a bad experience in this. It's not so black and white sometimes of, we did this by the book, but you know what? If we had done something a little different, it maybe have turned out a little bit better.
And that becomes, I'm sorry, but that becomes arbitrary to that particular situation.
Okay.
And then the next time someone comes in, it's handled by the book, and they're upset because this decision was different than by the book, and it was arbitrary. And then the next time somebody comes in, we don't go by the book again, and it's arbitrary. And then so you wind up with Mr. Sears having a bunch of billable hours because you're not following your laws and your policies that are in place. And Cynthia, you know good and well
And
that
what
that's what we have.
And
We
what
have
I'm
a system of laws and ordinances and policies that are there for them to use to run the city. And they are not authorized by us to go outside those policies. And they will get in trouble if they do, and they know that.
And what
So
I'm not
what-
asking anybody to not follow the rules. What I'm asking is for when we find a situation where the rules, where we can change something to better the situation so that now those are the new rules. That's what we're talking about, is a process for change.
And if you can bring to, and what Mr. Phillips has been asking you since the beginning here, is if you can bring him those specifics where that happened, and we need to look at that in order to change that particular thing that happened, that created that situation with that person, which is what you just described, then he'll be happy to bring that to us to look at that.
Okay?
We had an
So how
incident.
do we, because what I've been asked to do now is to find specific situations.
Well, you're
that have
telling us
left
they
the-
exist.
Because they do.
Okay.
And so what I'm saying is now I've been tasked with going out and getting this instead of having this be something that the city does.
Well, wait a minute.
Is to look at those things.
You
I
are,
can do that,
you're an elected official.
yes.
Who do you, the onus falls back on us, Cynthia, really, because we set these policies. And if we don't understand it, then we have the avenue to go and get the answers to disseminate that information. So we can't always assume that these guys are going to do all that work. It is part of our responsibility to interact and engage with the public. And that's on us, not them.
Okay.
Colleagues, I would like to suggest that we let other councilmen express their opinion instead of everything from one or two persons.
Mr. Sheriff.
Jump in.
What I can't understand fully, when you're talking about somebody, are you talking about the specific policy, or are you talking about the way that employee handled the policy? That's the biggest complaint I have, not the policy, but either they don't make it clear, or they don't present it in a way that citizen thought that they would get respect. That's the only complaint I ever hear. It's not the policy, it's the way it's presented. And that's a personnel problem that we do need to address, but there's nothing in our policies that's gonna fix that.
The instance, Councilwoman Jenkins, that you talk about, you said you do have specific instances. Have these been addressed to our city manager or our assistant city manager? If they've already occurred, I'm wondering, have they been addressed to the assistant city manager or the city manager?
I have to go back and look at some of them and how they were, because some of them were addressed with the former chief. And some of that stuff, I mean, at this point, I will bring every last one of them back here.
Well, not to us. That's not the process. The process is to go through the city manager.
Exactly.
We're not gonna, we can't sit here at this level and describe those issues unless it's been something that has been done wrong by staff outside of the parameters or a decision that should have been made in one direction that our policy would have driven them to make, if this makes sense, and they made it in another direction outside of policy. So but all of those things need to go by charter to the city manager, and then and then from him down to whatever department was involved.
I want to go back to a comment that Mr. Guillaume made, and I certainly do. There's certainly value in public engagement, and I support that 100%. I think you can go to our entire staff and talk about our processes of engagement. And I don't expect each of you to do this, but sometimes because you're not in our shoes 8 hours a day as we're running the operations, we have a lot of public interaction, a lot of public engagement, probably more so than you realize. And that's not your fault. It's just, but we can have more. And I'm all for taking it on the road, taking it to the public. I know we already do that in a lot of different departments, but I'd love to go out and do it more. Yeah, we're right. We'll get feedback on the cemetery. We'll get feedback on other operations. I think going to the community for that is outstanding. I don't think you're going to find anyone in our operation that's going to have any hesitation to do that. I think receiving that type of input is absolutely invaluable. We do a lot of it already, but certainly we can do a better job and we can do more. You know, if we're going to be specific, and I don't want to pick on, because I'm going to say it, I've been really impressed with what Chief Blankenship has done in his year as the chief. And I'm not going to throw any water backwards. I think the previous administration did an awesome job too. You know, I've said it before, we went from a police department that was not certified, not sanctioned. We had some operational deficiencies and issues. We've worked really hard in the last 10 to 12 years to bring those up to where they need to be, and I know the Chief Blankenship has worked extremely hard over the last year to raise them to even another level. So I'm very impressed. I can sit here today and tell you honestly, I cannot remember the last complaint that came in regarding a Newnan police officer to my desk.
One thing that has helped me also, I've had a couple of citizens who have voiced concerns, and I put them on the Citizens Academy and had them take the course.
Another example.
And they came back and they said, I didn't know. I didn't know that this went on and what they do, and it helped. And maybe that's a suggestion also.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would say that we've had a healthy discussion. And we see that there's sometimes that we have to listen a little more. And I think that's the best we can take from this. I completely support the management of not only the city manager's office, but department heads. I think they're doing great with what they can, but we can always listen a little bit more. That's all I have to say.
All right, so we've had the work session. I mean, this is a call meeting, so there's a motion out there on this, or?
I'd like to make a motion that we just not proceed.
Okay, you're gonna have to elaborate a little bit.
That is just, we've had the discussion that we not proceed with any more meetings, whatever, is that the right language? Or with the policies and procedures that we all agree? Help me with the, it's the motion to not to proceed. Now you want to add something to that, go ahead, to clarify.
It might be helpful, do we have our last policy or whatever it was to start this whole process? What was our motion for that?
Was to have a work session.
But that goes back before that even.
Well, it was a resolution we adopted.
Resolution adopted in June of 2020 to instruct staff to perform certain activities, whereby we went out and found Neris Leadership and Consulting Group that came in, performed phase one of a two-phase project, and then, as you may recall, she was unable to complete that. And so that task that resulted out of the adopted resolution was
It's not completed.
not completed. So I think that's why we're here today. As I recall from memory from April was, why did that stall? Why did we stop? Let's talk about that. And I think, the conversation's been good amongst yourselves, but that was the action at this point.
Actually, in February 8th, I asked, where are we with the resolution and the process that we had unanimously adopted to move forward? And that since the contractor that we hired was unable to finish, that we continue to execute the resolution that we had unanimously adopted to find another contractor to finish that process. And that was my request. in February of 2022. And then it became, well, let's talk about it and let's get an update. And that's how we ended up here, is talking about whether or not we wanted to continue with something we already voted to do. And all I'm asking is that we continue with that process.
What was the time frame again that we let lapse? Refresh my memory.
The original resolution was in June of 2020. Ms. Maris was hired after an exhaustive search, maybe 6 months later, in the beginning of 2021. We were in the middle of a pandemic at the time. You guys may recall you had one-on-one conversations with Ms. Maris.
Right.
For phase one, she sent this body a recommendation to move into phase two that had certain activities in it, and then Ms. Maris, for professional and personal obligations, was no longer able to fulfill that. And so that project ceased in spring of 2021.
Has there been any further inquiries if there's any other management organizations or consulting firms that would be willing to take this project on? I think that's what that's what I'm understanding, Ms. Jenkins, to ask, is there anybody that's able or willing to take this on to completion?
There may be, but we're waiting for direction from this council. If the council wants management to do that, then we'll reignite that process if that's what the council wants to do.
And just for my clarification, if nothing else, Ms. Jenkins, with the resolution, it was for, again, a professional consulting firm or management firm to look at our policies. It sounds like that you've kind of shifted gears to, you want public or
No, actually,
something.
the original thing said to have a citizen task force, but we said to go to a professional, and the professional came back and said, I don't think that's the best route to go, using professional expert, I think what is the subject matter experts is the term she used, to move forward, was what the majority of council members thought was the best route to go, and her recommendation. And that recommendation is where I'm switching gears to from the original. It is to go with what she said and continue the policy review with subject matter experts. But some of that subject matter expert stuff is part of the ordinance or the resolution was to somehow get some sort of citizen input. We didn't say specifically how, because that's not what we do. That's why we want a professional, is to be able to tell us how that is best gathered. You're asking me to solve a problem that what I'm asking is to hire somebody who can help us solve that combination of things, which is what was in the report, which is what we started, and I just want us to finish that process.
Again, just for my clarification, is this process, you said to solve a problem, or is it creating a problem?
It's not creating a problem because nobody is making up that citizens have said, hey, we want this to happen.
So what is the
We have
problem you want to
a bunch
solve?
of people come in here and say, we would like to have the policies reviewed to make sure that we are up to date, that we have the best things going on. Because during a crisis is not the time to say, hey, did our policy match up with the latest and greatest thing? It's when we don't have one. It's the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Let's look at this and make sure that citizens have a proper route, that some of the best practices are in place in our policies. I mean, because right now what we're saying is, hey, we're getting a law book, but we're not getting any specific to our community input. We don't have even much as a survey to say, hey, have you had an issue? What was that? Or, hey, let's say you've got an issue and it wasn't resolved, or you think that our policy is not reflective of what it should be. Who do you talk to get that kind of input? And is there a process? Because we do this with our planning. We have public meetings. We go to coffee shops, all that other stuff to get the input from our citizens. But when we ask them about how they got to interact any other way that doesn't require by law that we go out and try and get all this interaction, all of a sudden we don't want to do it. So I'm just...
But the interaction, what I've seen with the citizens, is they come to the elected officials.
is what you're saying is we are the interaction
Well, yes.
as the elected body. Each of us seeks our seat.
I mean, the interaction is either they come to us, or they'll go to the city manager, assistant city manager. I mean, I'm trying to understand the problem that
It,
if they're doing this, then I think we need to, and it's not, they're not getting results, then we need to specifically hear or see,
that,
and that's why I asked the question, if this has happened in the past, and they've come to you and you've gone to the city manager and nothing's been done, then I could say, yes, we have a problem.
Well, we just heard a few moments ago that the police department, as an example, was not meeting state standards a couple of years ago, and now they are, and they're certified. So I think that is progress. Now, they didn't meet it through you, they met it through the state board.
and that is a good thing. And what I'm asking for, y'all know what I'm asking for, the issue is that you just don't agree, so we can move on.
So I had a motion that, if it's fair to say, an incomplete motion. It wasn't specific, it was just a motion just not to move forward, and I think it needs to be more specific than that. But I never had a second, so I need,
So I'll withdraw the motion.
I'm sorry?
I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay.
Then I'll make one. It'll probably die from like a second too, but I'm gonna make it anyway, which is that we continue with the resolution that was executed in June of 2022 to find a replacement for Ms. Maris to continue the process that we unanimously voted for in June of 2020.
Okay, so we have that motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Okay, motion dies for lack of a second. Anything else to come before us? Okay, we've got 9 minutes for our other
Hey,
meeting.
Miss-
This
Miss-
meeting's adjourned. Yes, sir.
I was gonna say, Mr. Mayor, because that resolution is still active, and her resolution was kind of just a reiteration of the original resolution, that resolution is still technically in effect, correct?
It's out there, Mr. Sears. I mean, sure,
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all clear on that, so.
it is there.
Okay.
But staff does not have direction to execute the resolution at this point.
To continue execution.
Okay, anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. 6:30. Thank you.